And by 2012, I kind of looked back. I had been in this industry for 17 years, had kind of met all of my professional goals, met my financial goals, and said, I'm kind of finished.
What would make one of the most successful energy traders of all time walk away? John Arnold built his career at Enron, rose to the top of the energy trading world, and made hundreds of millions running his own hedge fund. But in 2012, he did something unexpected. He walked away from it all to focus on philanthropy and reshaping public policy. Now, through Arnold Ventures, he's tackling some of the biggest challenges in energy, infrastructure, and climate policy, among other areas. But here's the question: can philanthropy and policy improve the grid, lower costs and emissions, and enable new market opportunities and economic growth? That's what we're getting into on today's episode of the Energy Capital Podcast. I'm Doug Lewin, and my guest today is John Arnold, one of the most fascinating figures in the energy world. Today, we'll break down what John learned at Enron and how it shaped his approach to markets, how economic incentives, not ideology, are driving the energy transition, the biggest obstacles in permitting reform, infrastructure, and grid expansion, his investments in nuclear, geothermal, and transmission, and what's actually scalable. I'm excited about this one because John isn't just a trader or a philanthropist, he's a systems thinker. And by the end of this episode, you'll see why he believes we're at an inflection point for energy markets, infrastructure, and public policy. As always, please like, share, and review the Energy Capital Podcast wherever you listen. Please give us a 5-star review. It does help other people find the podcast, and share it within your network to help us reach more people. Let's dive in. Hope you enjoy the episode. John Arnold, welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I've been looking forward to this for a while. You're obviously a very interesting guy. I want to start with, so we'll talk about philanthropy, which is what you're doing full time these days. But before we do that, it's an energy podcast. You're an energy guy. Your background's in energy. Tell our audience a little about your background in energy.
Sure. So coming out of college, I wanted to go to Wall Street. Right? I thought that was where the game was, and I tried to get a job at one of the big investment banks, and that didn't work out. Closest thing I got was a job at this kind of emerging investment bank down in Houston for the energy business, Enron. And so
I think I heard of that one before.
21 years old, I moved to Houston to go work there. Got lucky enough to get put on the energy trading floor on my first day. It actually started in the oil group. Mm-hmm. It was kind of the quant at the end of the road, doing a bunch of Excel spreadsheet work, then kind of assisting on anything possible. And turns out I kind of fell into perfect career for me. And so stayed with Enron to and through bankruptcy. It was, quite the ride both ways. It was a company that was doing amazing things for a period, and then obviously kind of got over its skis and created a lot of pain for many people.
So you John, you started there in 95, right?
95.
Fresh out of college.
Yep.
And you were on that oil and gas side, the part that really became sort of infamous through, what was it, the smartest guys in the room or whatever. That was sort of all this like capital infrastructure going on. But it was kind of a different side of the house. Is that right?
Yeah. So there were a number of divisions.
Mm-hmm.
There was a group that was building power plants in India, a group that was trying to do broadband, a group doing water. I think they took this original concept, which was the deregulation that happened in the natural gas industry.
Kind of like 92, it was complete.
Yeah,
it was
in
long process.
92, yeah, exactly. So, a lot of this was started, there was this steps and iterations going on in the 60s and 70s, and then, Carter, Reagan, going into Bush. And so this market got deregulated early 90s and became this traded product, and let the market decide the price and let people take the price signals and decide how much, quantity to supply into the market. And I think there was this idea of, can you do this in other commodity type markets? And so obviously it's, transferred pretty easily to power, a bit of fits and starts there. But then the kind of questions about, can you actually trade broadband capacity in the same way? Can you do water in the same way? And obviously, or even trucking, and some of those markets have developed into kind of commodity markets and some haven't.
That's so fascinating. And I would like, there's obviously active discussions around water and what that would look like. We could go a lot of different ways down that, but you did quite well there. You had a really rapid rise at Enron. When Enron collapses, you then start your own firm and you're trading gas, and you're trading gas again during this period where it's kind of pre-shale. I mean, there's some shale and fracking going on, but it's pre-shale boom. And so talk a little bit about like what was your philosophy there? How were you so successful in that particular space at that particular time?
Yeah. So Enron went bankrupt in December 2001. I ended up starting Centaurus Energy in August. We started trading in August of 2002. And if you remember back in those days, kind of post Enron, there were a number of companies that had a model similar to Enron, and the Dynagy's and Southerns, et cetera. Right? And so there was this string of dominoes that fell whenever Enron went bankrupt. Some had a very similar model, notwithstanding the kind of financial community. Wall Street said, we don't know what's going on here. We're not funding any of this. And so the pure plays all started to have problems, and the utilities that had gotten into this market all kind of pulled back. So you had the same demand for hedging that existed and why this market exists in the first place.
There's not that many folks doing it.
Somebody has to price and manage warehouse risk.
Yeah.
Right. The demand for that stayed the same, but the amount of capital and number of providers of that service severely pulled back. So August of 2002, the market was a bit chaotic. And it was fairly easy for someone who had experience to kind of sit down and start making money day one, and that's what we did. The market obviously got built back up and is very, very efficient today. And even during that 10 years where I ran Centaurus, the market got built up and new players came in, new capital came in, sensing the opportunity fairly quickly. But at least in 2002, there was a great market opportunity for somebody with capital.
And there was like a particularly cold winter in there where you had stronger positions and a lot of folks. You made some money there. There was Hurricane Katrina and some of the risk that was taken there by others and by you. Can you talk a little bit about sort of that period and then sort of want to bring the story into where you decided not too long after that, I guess just a few years after Hurricane Katrina, somewhere in the 2010, you can let us know, you had some kind of a change, and you were like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I want to pivot and focus on philanthropy at this point. So kind of, if you would kind of walk us through that timeline and how that all went down.
Yeah. In some ways, natural gas is one of the best markets to trade in the world. Right? It's a closed system. It's one in which, because of FERC Order 636, the producers and the end users have to be differentiated, right? And so, the pipelines cannot take title to the gas like they can in oil. And so the molecule has to trade hands, and you generally will need an intermediary to do that. And then there's aspects about it, certainly in the 2000s, when it was getting, at least the first part of the 2000s, it was getting harder and harder to find the next molecule. And demand for natural gas was, very much driven at the margin. So it was the most expensive source of power generation. And so on, particularly hot days or particularly cold days, you would use a lot of gas, and, it was the marginal fuel, right? So either you needed a lot of it or a little bit. It was not a baseload fuel. And it was, of course, subject to these extraneous shocks, particularly hurricanes or, a very cold winter, for instance. And so because of that, in order for the market to balance, you had to have either very high or very low prices. There was very little supply elasticity in the market, and very little demand elasticity as well. And so, instead of, the market having to go up 10% in order to balance, it might have to double or even triple. We've certainly seen in history. And so coming from Enron, which was very much a fundamental-based trader, it was count the molecules, figure out where every molecule of supply is, every molecule of demand, and really try to model the past so you can predict the future. And kind of taking that same dynamic, having some capital and some success behind me, and trying to kind of staff with the best people I knew in the industry at the firm, led to this fantastic run of 10 years. And got to 2012, as you said, there was, cold winters, warm winters, there was Katrina, there was, a number of blow-ups in the industry that were happening around me. So saw a lot in that. You saw the emergence of Shell, which dramatically changed the dynamics of how natural gas is priced in this country. And by 2012, I kind of looked back. I had been in this industry for 17 years, had kind of met all of my professional goals, met my financial goals, and said, I'm kind of finished. I'm ready to step aside. I think there was kind of one day where I realized, it was like Sunday night, and historically I love Sunday nights because that was Monday morning, it was back on, right? And I loved going in to work on Mondays. And kind of one Sunday night, I was like, oh, it's Monday. And okay, this is time. If I'm not excited about going into work, number one, I shouldn't be spending my time doing it. Number two, I'm probably not going to be top of my game anymore. And it's an extraordinarily competitive field. And if you're not top of your game, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, so then you kind of decided, okay, I've done these other things. I've had success. I'm going to put the focus at that point on philanthropy. So can you talk a little about your approach to philanthropy, what you think is right about philanthropy, what's wrong about it, and how you're doing it different here at Arnold Ventures?
Yeah. So, I had started giving some money away even back when I was working at Enron, and kind of gotten very interested in K through 12 education. And this question about how do you have two schools that are both educating and a very similar demographics, similar kids that are getting two very different outcomes. And so kind of started a 10 plus year journey on that continues up and through today of, trying to figure out what's the theory of change? How can we get more schools to look like the better school rather than the worst school? And I think, during that kind of first 10 years of that journey, it was trying a lot of things. In K-12 philanthropy, K-12 reform, there were a lot of ideas, and we were looking at a bunch of them. And I finally settled into what are the policy levers? And it was policy over programs. And we found that if we wanted to do things that were sustainable, that were structural, that were scalable, it was hard to do that through the introduction of a new program for a number of reasons. It was much easier to do that through policy. Yeah. And I think the outcomes of any system, including the education system, are as much a function of the policy, the framework around it. What are the rules and incentives of a system as they are about the program and the people involved? So that's how our philanthropic journey started. Met my wife during this time. She was an M&A lawyer that had moved to Houston to help start a oil and gas company. She did that for a few years, kind of realized she was getting pulled more and more into our philanthropic efforts. At the time, I was still doing Centaurus full time, but I was spending, in the beginning, 1 hour a week, and then 1 hour a day, and then a couple hours a day, and was getting more excited about some of that work. And so, by 2012, we had, as a foundation, had started to spread into other areas, including into criminal justice, into public finance. We're starting to think about healthcare, and this was becoming a bigger enterprise. And I was more interested in that on the Sunday nights. And so decided to leave energy, at least running an investment fund with outside capital, stop doing that, and go, spend most of my effort on philanthropy.
Do you have that same feeling for philanthropy? Because I'm sure there's quite a rush with energy trading, right? Like that, the feeling you're describing on Sunday night of being excited for Monday morning. It's different, but is it similar as well? Do you get that kind of feeling from the work you're doing now?
Yeah, it's completely different. Yeah, I couldn't have chosen a more different field, right? Which makes it very intellectually stimulating and challenging. I think one of the great things, also one of the bad things about trading, is the immediate returns. right? The market tells you whether you're right or wrong.
Instant feed.
Instant.
Know right away whether you got it right.
And switch to a field of public policy, which has very, very long-term deferred feedback. And you can spend years and years working on something without having clear feedback about, are you making progress or not?
Yeah. So I've heard you speak before about the difference between philanthropy and charity, and I think you were just getting at it there, right? Thank you for listening to this free preview of the Energy Capital podcast. You can access the entire episode as well as the Texas Energy and Power newsletter archives at douglewin.com. That's DOUGLEWIN.com. You'll also be able to attend paid subscriber-only chats, and you'll receive full access to all of the Texas Grid roundups and reading and podcast picks. Please check it out, and thank you for listening.